I discovered the discrepancy on a Tuesday morning while reviewing the quarterly financial statements over my second cup of coffee. And what I found made my hands shake so badly, I nearly dropped my favorite mug. After 35 years in banking, I knew exactly what a fraudulent paper trail looked like. And this one was textbook perfect, except for one tiny mistake that whoever created it never expected anyone with my background to notice. My name is Xavier Sanderson, and I had retired to the Meadowbrook Estates community in Scottsdale, Arizona 3 years ago with dreams of golf, good wine, and absolutely no spreadsheets. My wife Linda had passed away 2 years before my retirement, and our daughter Emily lived in Boston with her family. So I figured a sunny retirement community would be the perfect place to start fresh. The house was beautiful, the neighbors seemed friendly enough, and the HOA fees were reasonable at $350 a month. I should have known better than to assume anything involving an HOA would stay simple. The trouble started about 6 months ago when Deborah Mitchell, our HOA president, began pushing for a special assessment of $2,000 per household to replenish the reserve fund for upcoming maintenance projects. Deborah was exactly what you would picture when someone says, HOA Karen, a 52-year-old woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob, designer athleisure, where that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and an expression that suggested she was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with a license plate that read, HOA Queen, and had never met a rule she did not want to enforce with the zealotry of a medieval inquisitor. At the emergency meeting she called to discuss the assessment, Deborah stood at the front of the community clubhouse in her Lululemon best, pointing at a PowerPoint presentation that would have made a fifth grader embarrassed. Our reserve fund is critically depleted, she announced, her voice carrying that particular pitch that made dogs bark 3 streets over. We need immediate action to prevent our property values from plummeting. I raised my hand from the back row. Deborah, I'm looking at the annual report from last year, and it shows we had nearly $400,000 in reserves. Where did that money go? Her face flushed red, clashing terribly with her hot pink sports bra that was visible under her mesh workout top. Mr. Sanderson, if you had bothered to read the financial statements properly, you would see that we had significant unexpected expenses. I did read them. I see line items for roof repairs, pool maintenance, and landscape upgrades. But the numbers don't add up to anywhere near $400,000 in expenditures. Are you accusing the board of impropriety? Her voice went up another octave. I'm asking for clarity on where the money went. That's what a reserve fund is for, transparency. The treasurer, Patricia Caldwell, stood up next to Deborah. Patricia was 48, with mousy brown hair pulled back in a tight bun that gave her a permanently startled expression. She wore business casual clothes that looked like they came from a clearance rack in 2010, and she always carried a beaten-up leather folder stuffed with papers. Mr. Sanderson, I can assure you that every penny is accounted for. If you would like to schedule an appointment, I can walk you through the ledgers. I nodded. I would appreciate that, actually. How about tomorrow morning? Patricia's left eye twitched slightly. I'll have to check my schedule. I'll email you. That email never came. Instead, I got a certified letter 3 days later informing me that I was being fined $500 for creating discord at an official HOA meeting, and another $250 for failure to properly store my garbage cans, which was rich considering my garbage cans were in my garage, exactly where they were supposed to be. That's when I decided to do some digging on my own. I had nothing but time, a brain that still remembered every trick in the forensic accounting playbook, and a growing suspicion that Deborah and Patricia were running a scam that would make a mob accountant proud. I started by requesting copies of all financial documents under Arizona's HOA statutes, which require boards to make such documents available to homeowners. Deborah tried to stall, claiming I needed to submit my request in writing, in triplicate, with 72 hours' notice, during a full moon while standing on one leg. I knew the actual law required them to provide documents within 10 business days of a reasonable request, so I sent a formal letter citing the specific statute and threatened to contact an attorney if they continued to obstruct. The documents arrived on day 10, delivered to my doorstep in a cardboard box that looked like it had been kicked down a flight of stairs. Inside were hundreds of pages of poorly organized bank statements, invoices, receipts, and handwritten notes that would make an auditor weep. It was clearly an attempt to overwhelm me with paper, hoping I would give up. They did not know who they were dealing with. I spent the next 2 weeks organizing everything chronologically, cross-referencing bank statements with reported expenses, and building a spreadsheet that would have made my former colleagues proud. The picture that emerged was damning. Over the past 3 years, approximately $675,000 had gone missing from the reserve account in small increments that were designed to avoid immediate detection. The method was clever, I had to admit. Patricia would write checks for legitimate expenses, but she would inflate the amounts by 10 to 15%. For example, a landscaping bill for $5,000 would be recorded as $5,750. The extra $750 would be deposited into a separate account that did not appear on any of the official HOA documentation. Sometimes, she would create entirely fictional vendors for services that were never actually performed. ABC Maintenance Solutions had been paid $42,000 over 2 years for repairs that I could find no evidence of ever happening. But the real smoking gun was in the quarterly reports to the reserve account. Every 3 months, like clockwork, there would be a transfer labeled investment dividend return that would deposit money back into the reserves, making it look like the HOA was earning interest on wisely invested funds. These deposits were always just enough to keep the account balance looking healthy on paper, while money was being siphoned off in the background. I needed to find out where that money was actually going. The check images from the bank statements showed that most of the inflated and fraudulent payments were being deposited into an account at Desert Valley Credit Union under the name Meadowbrook Management Services, LLC. A quick search of Arizona's Corporation Commission database showed that this LLC had been registered 3 years ago by none other than Patricia Caldwell. I drove to the credit union branch on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in my best suit and carrying my old business cards from my banking days. Sometimes the old-fashioned approach works better than any amount of internet sleuthing. I asked to speak with the branch manager about setting up business accounts for a new venture I was considering. The manager, a pleasant woman named Susan who looked to be in her early 30s, was happy to discuss their business banking options. As we talked, I casually mentioned that a friend had recommended their credit union and had an LLC account there, Meadowbrook Management Services. "Oh yes, Mrs. Caldwell," Susan said with a smile. "She's been a client for several years, very organized with her bookkeeping." "That's good to hear. I imagine she does a lot of wire transfers given the nature of property management." Susan's professional demeanor prevented her from sharing specific account details, but she nodded. "We do offer competitive rates on international wire transfers, which many of our business clients appreciate. international wire transfers. That was interesting. Why would a small HOA management company need to send money overseas? I thanked Susan for her time and left with a brochure I had no intention of reading. Back home, I dug deeper into Patricia's background. Property records showed that she and her husband owned a modest home in Tempe, bought 15 years ago for $230,000. Her husband worked as a high school chemistry teacher. They had 2 kids in college. Nothing about their lifestyle suggested they had access to hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen funds. So where was the money going? I decided to try a different approach. I created a fake email account and signed up for a people search database that charged $30 a month. Within 2 hours, I had Patricia's social media profiles, her husband's LinkedIn, and a wealth of information about her extended family. Most of it was mundane vacation photos, kids' graduation pictures, complaints about Arizona summers. But then I found something interesting. About 2 years ago, Patricia had posted a series of photos from a trip to the Cayman Islands. The caption read, "Celebrating good news with family." In the background of one beach photo, I could make out a man who looked familiar. I zoomed in and cross-referenced with other photos on Patricia's account. It was Gregory Caldwell, Patricia's younger brother, who according to LinkedIn worked as a financial consultant in Georgetown, Grand Cayman, the Cayman Islands, international wire transfers, a financial consultant brother. The pieces were starting to fit together in a very ugly picture. I spent the next week researching offshore banking and money laundering schemes. The basic setup was simple and depressingly common. Patricia would steal money from the HOA, transfer it to her LLC account, then wire it to an offshore account in the Caymans where her brother would help hide it in the labyrinthine financial structures that make those islands so popular with people who have money they should not have. The funds would be cleaned, invested, and eventually could be brought back to the United States as legitimate investment returns or business income. But I needed proof, and that meant I needed to find the offshore account. That was going to be significantly harder than tracking domestic bank transfers. I started attending every HOA board meeting, sitting in the front row with my notebook, asking pointed questions about every line item on the budget. Deborah's face would turn progressively redder throughout each meeting, and Patricia developed a nervous habit of clicking her pen repeatedly whenever I spoke. "Mr. Sanderson, we appreciate your enthusiasm for HOA governance," Deborah said at one particularly contentious meeting, "but your constant questioning is disrupting the board's ability to function efficiently." "I'm just trying to understand where my money is going," I replied calmly. "For instance, I see we paid $15,000 to Summit Property Consultants last month. What exactly did they consult on?" Patricia fumbled with her papers. "That was for a feasibility study on potential community improvements." "Can I see a copy of this study?" "It's still in draft form." "So we paid $15,000 for a draft. These things take time, Mr. Sanderson," I smiled. "I'm sure they do. I'm just curious because I cannot find any business registration for Summit Property Consultants in Arizona, or Nevada, or California. Could you provide me with their contact information so I can verify this is a legitimate vendor?" The silence in the room was delicious. Finally, Deborah stood up. "This meeting is adjourned. The board will take Mr. Sanderson's concerns under advisement." After that meeting, the harassment escalated. I received violation notices for everything imaginable. My mailbox was 1 inch too far to the left. My front door wreath was not in the approved color palette. My car was parked at an improper angle in my own driveway. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $100 to $500. It was textbook retaliation, and it was also a very stupid move on their part because it established a clear pattern that would be useful later. I documented everything with photographs, timestamps, and detailed notes. I also started reaching out to other homeowners who I suspected might have had similar experiences with the board. What I found was eye-opening. Tom Richardson, who lived 3 streets over, had been fighting the HOA for 8 months over a fence they claimed was 2 inches too tall. The legal fees had cost him $12,000, and he had eventually given up and torn down a perfectly good fence just to make the harassment stop. Sarah Chen had been fined repeatedly for having unauthorized exterior modifications when she installed solar panels which were actually protected by Arizona state law that prohibited HOAs from banning them. She had also given up fighting after spending thousands on legal fees. Marcus and Jennifer Walsh had tried to run for the HOA board 2 years ago on a platform of financial transparency, and had been subjected to such a vicious smear campaign that they had withdrawn from the race. Anonymous flyers had appeared throughout the neighborhood accusing Marcus of financial fraud, which was completely fabricated but effective. The pattern was clear. Anyone who questioned the board or threatened their control was systematically harassed into submission or driven out of the community. Deborah and Patricia had created a little fiefdom where they could steal with impunity because everyone was too scared or too tired to fight back. But I was neither scared nor tired. I was angry, and I had the skills to do something about it. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I had become friendly with Robert Chen, Sarah's husband, who worked as an IT specialist. Over beers one evening, I mentioned my suspicions about the offshore accounts. "You know," Robert said thoughtfully, "Patricia's brother Gregory has a website for his consulting business. These financial guys always have websites. Maybe there's something useful there." I had not thought to check for a website. Sure enough, Gregory Caldwell had a slick professional site advertising his services as a wealth management specialist for international clients seeking privacy and asset protection. The site was carefully worded to sound legitimate while basically advertising his services in helping people hide money. What was more interesting was the site's contact form, which Robert helped me exploit. Using some technical wizardry that I did not fully understand, Robert was able to determine that the contact form submissions were being sent to an email address at a company called Harborside Financial Management Limited. A search for that company name led me to the Cayman Islands Corporate Registry, which is partially public. Harborside Financial Management Limited was indeed registered in the Caymans, with Gregory Caldwell listed as a director. But there was another name on the registration that made my heart race. Patricia Caldwell was listed as a beneficial owner. This was it. This was the proof I needed that Patricia had a direct ownership stake in an offshore financial entity. Now I just needed to connect the money trail from Meadowbrook Estates to Harborside Financial. I decided it was time to bring in professional help. I contacted an attorney I had worked with during my banking career, James Morrison, who had since specialized in HOA law and fraud cases. I drove to his office in Phoenix on a Monday morning with 3 bankers' boxes full of evidence. James was in his early 60s, with gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to my presentation for 2 hours, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Xavier, this is substantial," he said when I finished. "You have got clear evidence of embezzlement and fraud. The offshore component adds money laundering to the mix, which makes this a federal case. What are my options?" We can file a civil lawsuit on behalf of the HOA membership to recover the stolen funds and remove the current board. But given the amounts involved and the interstate nature of the wire transfers, I think we should also report this to the FBI. This is beyond simple HOA drama. This is serious financial crime. How long will that take? Civil case, probably 18 months to 2 years if it goes to trial. Federal investigation, who knows? Could be months or years depending on their caseload and priorities. I shook my head. I want to move faster. Is there a way to force their hand? James thought for a moment. We could call an emergency special meeting of the HOA membership and present your findings. Under Arizona law, the members can vote to remove board members and demand an independent audit. If you can get enough homeowners on your side, you can take control of the board and then file criminal complaints from there. Let's do it. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I created a detailed presentation outlining my findings, printed hundreds of flyers explaining the situation, and went door to door throughout Meadowbrook Estates, talking to every homeowner who would listen. Robert helped me set up a website where people could access all the documents and evidence I had compiled. The response was overwhelming. People were furious. Many had suspected something was wrong but had not known how to fight back. Others were shocked to learn how much money had been stolen. Within days, I had over 100 homeowners who had signed a petition demanding an emergency special meeting. Under Arizona HOA statutes, if 25% of homeowners petition for a special meeting, the board must hold one within 30 days. We had well over that threshold. I delivered the petition to Deborah personally, along with a formal agenda item, a vote of no confidence in the current board, and a motion to authorize an independent forensic audit. Deborah's face went through several shades of red and purple when she read the petition. This is a witch hunt, Xavier. You are going to regret this. The only people who should have regrets are the ones who stole $675,000 from their neighbors, I replied evenly. The special meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the community clubhouse. We expected maybe 150 people. Over 300 showed up, forcing us to move the meeting to the nearby elementary school gymnasium that the HOA rented for overflow events. I had never been so nervous in my life. Public speaking was not my strength, and I was about to accuse 2 women of serious crimes in front of hundreds of people. James had advised me to stick to the facts and let the evidence speak for itself. Deborah called the meeting to order with barely concealed rage. This special meeting has been called by petition of the membership. Mr. Sanderson has requested time to present allegations against the board. I want to remind everyone that defamation is a serious legal matter, and making false accusations can result in significant liability. That was a threat, plain and simple. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. I stood up and walked to the front of the gymnasium, connecting my laptop to the projector. Thank you all for coming, I began. I am going to present what I have found in my review of our HOA's financial records. I know this is not how any of us wanted to spend our Saturday, but I believe you all deserve to know where your money has gone. I walked them through it all. The inflated invoices, the fake vendors, the Shell LLC, the Cayman Islands connection, the offshore financial company with Patricia's name on it. I showed bank statements, corporate registrations, and a timeline of how the money had moved from our reserve account to Patricia's LLC to international wire transfers. The room was absolutely silent except for my voice and the click of the projector advancing slides. People's faces went from curious to shocked to angry as the presentation continued. When I finished, I said simply. I believe that our treasurer, Patricia Caldwell, with the knowledge and assistance of our president, Deborah Mitchell, has systematically embezzled approximately $675,000 from this HOA over the past 3 years. I am asking this body to vote to remove both of them from the board immediately and to authorize a full forensic audit by an independent accounting firm. I am also recommending that we file criminal complaints with the appropriate authorities. The gymnasium erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, and calling for Deborah and Patricia to respond. I noticed that Patricia had gone completely pale and was gripping the edge of the table in front of her. Deborah, on the other hand, had gone on the offensive. "This is absurd," she shouted over the crowd. "Mr. Sanderson has created a fantasy based on his misunderstanding of basic accounting principles. He is a bitter old man who has nothing better to do than create drama." "Then you should have no problem with an independent audit," I replied calmly. "We already have audits done annually by an accounting firm that Patricia selected and pays. I am talking about a truly independent forensic audit by a firm chosen by the membership." Patricia finally stood up, her voice shaking. "I want my attorney present before I answer any questions." That statement sent another wave of shock through the crowd. If she had nothing to hide, why would she need an attorney? James stood up from the audience. "For the record, I am James Morrison, attorney at law. I am here as a resident of this community and as Mr. Sanderson's legal counsel. I want to assure everyone that Xavier has conducted his investigation carefully and ethically. The evidence he has presented is documented and verifiable. I have reviewed it all personally." Deborah pointed at James. "You are part of this conspiracy. This is a coordinated attack on the board." "Mrs. Mitchell," James said evenly, "if you believe Mr. Sanderson has defamed you, you are welcome to file a lawsuit. However, I am confident that everything he has presented today is factually accurate and defensible. The question before this body is simple. Do you want an independent audit or not?" The vote was not even close. 287 homeowners voted in favor of removing Deborah and Patricia from the board immediately and authorizing an independent forensic audit. Only 12 voted against, mostly friends of Deborah who had benefited from favorable treatment over the years. A temporary board was appointed, led by Marcus Walsh, who had tried to run for the board 2 years earlier. The new board's first action was to freeze all HOA bank accounts and credit cards pending the audit. The second action was to change all passwords and locks to HOA facilities to prevent Deborah or Patricia from accessing or destroying any records. The third action was to file a police report. The Scottsdale Police Department sent 2 detectives to interview me the following Tuesday. Detective Lisa Warren and Detective Michael Foster were both in their 40s, professional and thorough. They spent 4 hours going through my evidence, asking questions, and taking copies of everything. "This is solid work, Mr. Sanderson," Detective Warren said. "You basically did our job for us. We will need to get subpoenas for the bank records and work with federal authorities on the offshore components, but you have given us a great starting point. How long before charges are filed?" I asked. "That depends on a lot of factors. The DA will need to review everything, we need to complete our investigation, and we will need cooperation from federal authorities given the interstate wire transfers. I would estimate at least 6 months, possibly longer." "What about freezing the offshore accounts? If Patricia and her brother know we are onto them, won't they try to move the money?" Detective Foster nodded. "We are going to move quickly on getting court orders to freeze any accounts we can identify. The Caymans are not always cooperative, but we have treaties in place for cases involving money laundering. We will do our best." The forensic audit was completed 8 weeks later by a firm out of Phoenix that specialized in fraud investigations. Their report was even more damning than my amateur investigation had been. The total amount stolen was actually $793,000, not the $675,000 I had calculated. I had missed some transactions buried in previous years' records that predated the documents I had been given. The audit also found that Deborah had been receiving kickbacks from some of the legitimate vendors the HOA used. A landscaping company had been overcharging by 20% and giving Deborah half of the excess. The pool maintenance company had a similar arrangement. Deborah's take was smaller than Patricia's, about $68,000 over 3 years, but it was still theft. The criminal investigation moved slowly, as these things do. The Scottsdale police worked with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and together they began the process of tracing the offshore accounts and building a prosecution case. I was interviewed multiple times, as were dozens of other homeowners and vendors. Patricia and Deborah both hired expensive criminal defense attorneys. Patricia's lawyer issued a statement claiming that any money that went to her LLC was for legitimate consulting services provided to the HOA. Deborah's lawyer claimed she had been misled by Patricia and was not aware of any financial impropriety. The civil lawsuit moved faster. The new HOA board, representing all the homeowners, filed suit against both Patricia and Deborah for embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. We also named Patricia's brother Gregory as a defendant for conspiracy and money laundering. That lawsuit included a request for a temporary restraining order freezing all of their assets. The judge granted the TRO after reviewing our evidence. Patricia and Deborah were prohibited from selling or transferring any assets, including their homes, cars, or bank accounts. Gregory, who was served with papers in the Cayman Islands through an international process server, ignored the lawsuit entirely, which resulted in a default judgment against him. In the meantime, life at Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal. The new board, with Marcus as president and me serving as treasurer, worked to rebuild trust and transparency. We implemented new financial controls, including requiring dual signatures on all checks over $500 and mandatory quarterly audits by an independent firm. We also established a finance committee of homeowners with accounting backgrounds to review all expenditures monthly. The special assessment that Deborah had tried to push through was canceled once we froze the accounts and prevented further theft. We actually had enough money in reserves to cover planned maintenance for the next several years, once we accounted for what was stolen. 8 months after I gave my presentation at the special meeting, the criminal charges were finally filed. Patricia Caldwell was indicted on 14 counts of felony theft, 6 counts of fraud, and 8 counts of money laundering. Deborah Mitchell was indicted on 6 counts of felony theft and 3 counts of fraud. Gregory Caldwell was indicted on 9 counts of money laundering and conspiracy, though he remained in the Cayman Islands and showed no signs of returning to the United States to face charges. The trial was set for the following spring, but it never happened. Patricia's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She agreed to plead guilty to 8 counts of theft and 4 counts of money laundering in exchange for the other charges being dropped. She also agreed to cooperate fully in the recovery of the stolen funds and to testify against her brother if he was ever apprehended. The plea deal required Patricia to serve 6 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, with the possibility of early release after 4 years if she maintained good behavior. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $793,000, though realistically we knew we would be lucky to recover half of that. Deborah took her case to trial, maintaining her innocence and claiming she had trusted Patricia to handle the finances properly. The jury did not buy it. They convicted her on all counts after just 4 hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered restitution of $68,000. The asset recovery process was complicated and frustrating. Patricia and her husband's home was sold, netting about $180,000 after the mortgage was paid off. Their retirement accounts, totaling another $95,000, were seized. Deborah's assets brought in another $120,000, including her Mercedes SUV, which was auctioned off for far less than she had paid for it. The offshore accounts were harder to crack. The FBI worked with Cayman Islands authorities and eventually identified 3 accounts at 2 different banks that held approximately $340,000 traceable to the stolen HOA funds. However, getting that money repatriated to the United States required navigating a maze of international treaties, court orders, and bureaucratic procedures that took nearly 2 years. In the end, we recovered approximately $610,000 of the $793,000 that had been stolen. It was not perfect, but it was far better than nothing. The recovered funds were placed back into the HOA reserve account under strict new controls, and the community was able to move forward without any special assessments. Gregory Caldwell remained in the Cayman Islands, essentially untouchable unless he was foolish enough to return to the United States or travel to a country with an extradition treaty. There was a warrant for his arrest and a conviction in absentia, but practically speaking, he had gotten away with it. That bothered me, but I had to accept that sometimes the bad guys win, at least partially. My role in exposing the fraud made me something of a local celebrity, which I found deeply uncomfortable. A reporter from the Arizona Republic wrote a feature story about the case that was picked up by several national news outlets. I was invited to speak at HOA conferences about financial oversight and fraud prevention, which was ironic considering I had moved to a retirement community specifically to avoid any kind of work. But I said yes to some of those speaking engagements because I realized how common this problem was. HOAs across the country were being victimized by board members who saw the reserve funds as their personal piggy banks. Most of the time, nobody noticed because the amounts were smaller, and the homeowners did not have anyone with the skills to detect the fraud. I felt obligated to share what I had learned in the hope that it might prevent others from being victimized. Emily, my daughter, flew out from Boston when the trial concluded. We had dinner at my favorite steakhouse, and she raised her glass in a toast. "To Dad, the most stubborn man in Arizona," she said with a smile. "Mom would be so proud of you." That made my eyes water a bit. Linda had always been the one who pushed me to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or unpopular. She would have been all over this case if she had been alive, probably even more relentlessly than I had been. "I just did what needed to be done," I said. "No, you did what most people are too scared or too tired to do. You fought back. You did not let them intimidate you, and you got justice for 300 families who were being robbed. That is not nothing, Dad." She was right, I supposed. It was not nothing. Life at Meadowbrook Estates settled into a pleasant routine. The new board was professional and transparent. We published detailed financial reports every quarter, held regular town halls where homeowners could ask questions, and established clear processes for everything from violation notices to vendor selection. The harassment and arbitrary fines stopped completely. I actually started enjoying my retirement again. I played golf 3 times a week, took up woodworking, and even started dating a wonderful woman named Helen who lived 2 streets over. She had moved in about a year earlier and had no idea about the whole HOA drama until our 3rd date, when I finally explained why people kept coming up to me at the grocery store to shake my hand. "So you are telling me you took down a corrupt HOA board that was stealing from everyone?" She asked, her eyes wide. "I guess that is one way to put it." "That is incredibly sexy, Xavier," I laughed. "Forensic accounting is sexy now. Standing up to bullies is always sexy." 2 years after Patricia and Deborah were sent to prison, I was working in my garage on a bookshelf for Helen when Marcus called me. "Xavier, I thought you would want to know. The FBI just called. They arrested Gregory Caldwell." I put down my sander. "Where? I thought he was still in the Caymans." He was, but apparently he got greedy and tried to set up a new scheme targeting expats in Costa Rica. The Costa Rican authorities caught wind of it and arrested him. They are extraditing him to the United States to face the charges from our case, plus new charges related to the Costa Rica scheme. Good. I hope they throw the book at him. His trial is scheduled for 6 months from now. The prosecutor wants to know if you would be willing to testify. Absolutely. Gregory Caldwell's trial was almost anticlimactic after everything that had come before. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his attorney's strategy of claiming he had no knowledge that the money his sister sent him was stolen was laughable. The jury convicted him on all counts, and the judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison. At the sentencing hearing, the judge made some comments that stuck with me. "Mr. Caldwell, you and your co-conspirators betrayed the trust of hundreds of families who were simply trying to maintain their homes and their community. You treated their hard-earned money as your personal slush fund, all while hiding behind the veneer of professional financial services. White-collar criminals like you often escape accountability, but not today. Your sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the harm you caused." After the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse with James, who had been with me through the entire process. "You did it, Xavier. You got all 3 of them." "We did it," I corrected. "I could not have done this without your help." "Maybe. But I have been practicing law for 30 years, and I can count on one hand the number of clients who have had your determination and your skills. Most people would have given up when the harassment started. You doubled down." "I was too stubborn to quit. Linda always said it was my worst quality." "In this case, it was your best quality." I thought about that on the drive back to Scottsdale. Stubbornness, determination, whatever you wanted to call it. Maybe it was genetic. Maybe it was learned from decades in banking where attention to detail was everything. Maybe it was just being angry enough at injustice to refuse to let it stand. Whatever the reason, I was glad I had not given up. Not when Deborah tried to intimidate me with fines. Not when the volume of documents was overwhelming. Not when people told me I was wasting my time or making trouble over nothing, because it was not nothing. It was $793,000 stolen from people who had trusted their elected representatives to manage their money honestly. It was families who had scrimped and saved to afford their HOA fees, only to have that money siphoned off to offshore accounts. It was about the fundamental principle that people in positions of trust should not be allowed to abuse that trust for personal gain. The final chapter of the story came 4 years after my initial discovery. Patricia Caldwell was released from prison after serving 4 years of her 6-year sentence. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to somewhere in New Mexico to live with relatives and was working at a restaurant. Deborah Mitchell was also released around the same time and reportedly moved to Nevada. Though I did not know much about what she was doing, Gregory Caldwell was still in federal prison and would be for several more years. I hoped the experience had taught him something, though I doubted it. People who are willing to steal that amount of money rarely learn their lesson from punishment alone. As for me, I was doing just fine. The bookshelf I had been building that day Marcus called about Gregory's arrest was now in Helen's living room, holding her collection of mystery novels. We had gotten married in a small ceremony the previous summer, combining our households and our lives. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was thriving under honest leadership. We had completed the roof repairs, upgraded the pool area, and repaved several streets, all funded by the reserve account that had been replenished with the recovered stolen funds. Property values in our community had actually increased, and the waiting list for homes in Meadowbrook was longer than it had ever been. People wanted to live in a community with transparent, honest governance. Imagine that. I was sitting on my back patio one evening, watching the sun set over the Arizona desert when Helen came out with 2 glasses of wine. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling into the chair next to me. "Just reflecting on the past few years. How different things could have been if I had not decided to look into those financial statements. Do you regret it? All the stress and the harassment and the years spent dealing with lawyers and trials." I thought about that for a moment. No regrets. It needed to be done, and I was in a position to do it. If I had walked away, Patricia and Deborah would still be stealing, and hundreds of families would still be getting robbed. So no regrets. Good, because the new HOA president called today. "They want to name the renovated community clubhouse after you, the Xavier Sanderson Community Center." I groaned. "Please tell me you told them no." "I told them I would ask you, but I already knew what you would say." "I do not need my name on a building, Helen. I just wanted to stop people from being robbed." She squeezed my hand. "I know. That is why they want to honor you, but I will call them tomorrow and politely decline on your behalf." "Thank you." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear kids playing in one of the neighborhood parks. Normal sounds of a normal community functioning the way it was supposed to function. I had spent 35 years in banking, handling millions of dollars in transactions, making loans, managing investments, dealing with fraud investigations. I had worked with billionaires and paupers, honest people and criminals. I thought I had seen everything the financial world had to offer. But nothing in my career had prepared me for the experience of taking on a corrupt HOA board and winning. It had been frustrating, stressful, occasionally frightening, and ultimately deeply satisfying. I had made a difference in my community in a way that my banking career, for all its success, had never quite achieved. The funny thing was, I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates to escape spreadsheets and financial analysis. I had wanted nothing more than golf, good wine, and peace and quiet. Instead, I had ended up conducting one of the most complex forensic accounting investigations of my career, testifying at multiple trials, and becoming an accidental advocate for HOA reform. Linda would have laughed at the irony. She always said I was incapable of just relaxing and letting things go. She was right, of course. But in this case, my inability to let things go had saved our community from continued victimization and brought 3 criminals to justice. Marcus called me a few weeks later with news that the last of the international recovery efforts had been completed. The Cayman Islands authorities had finally released the remaining frozen funds, and after legal fees and administrative costs, we had recovered an additional $43,000. That brings the total recovery to $653,000, Marcus said. Out of $793,000 stolen, we got back over 80%. That is remarkable, Xavier. It is. What is the board going to do with it? Put it back in reserves where it belongs. We are also setting up a legal defense fund in case anyone ever needs to challenge the board again. We want to make sure that homeowners have resources to fight back if something like this ever happens again. Smart move. It was actually Helen's idea. She suggested it at the last board meeting. I smiled. Of course she did. Helen had jumped into community involvement with both feet after we got married, serving on committees and bringing fresh ideas to everything she touched. The Legal Defense Fund was established with $25,000 from the recovered funds, with the stipulation that it could only be used to support homeowners challenging board actions they believed to be improper or illegal. It was a small thing, but it sent a powerful message that the days of unchecked board power at Meadowbrook Estates were over. I was interviewed one last time by the Arizona Republic for a follow-up story on the case. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, asked me what I thought the biggest lesson was from the whole experience. Trust but verify, I said. People in positions of power need to be held accountable, and that requires engaged homeowners who are willing to ask questions and demand transparency. Most HOA board members are honest people trying to serve their community, but the structure of HOAs makes them vulnerable to abuse by the small percentage who are not honest. You cannot just assume everything is fine because it looks fine on the surface. What would you say to someone who suspects their HOA board might be engaged in financial misconduct? Start by requesting financial documents. You have a legal right to see them. Look for patterns that do not make sense. Large payments to vendors you cannot verify. Vague line items without supporting documentation. Declining reserve balances despite regular contributions. If something seems off, it probably is. And do not be intimidated when the board pushes back. That is often a sign you are onto something. Would you do it all again, knowing how difficult it was? In a heartbeat. Standing up to corruption is never easy, but it is always worth it. The article ran with a photo of me standing in front of the Meadowbrook Estates sign, looking far more serious than I felt. Helen had it framed and hung it in her office, which I protested was incredibly narcissistic, but secretly pleased me. Years passed. The scandal faded into community lore, the story new residents heard when they moved in about the time the HOA board got caught stealing, and a retired banker took them down. Patricia and Deborah became cautionary tales. Gregory became the villain who almost got away with it but ultimately faced justice. I gradually stepped back from active involvement in HOA governance, having served my 2-year term as treasurer and feeling that I had done my part. Younger residents with fresh energy took over, and I was happy to let them. I had spent enough time in meetings to last a lifetime, but I stayed vigilant. Every quarter, I reviewed the financial statements that were emailed to all homeowners. I checked the vendor list against business registrations. I verified that the reserve account balances matched the reported figures. Old habits die hard, and I never wanted to see Meadowbrook Estates victimized again. Helen teased me about it. You are going to audit the HOA from beyond the grave, are you not? Someone has to keep them honest. They are honest, Xavier. You made sure of that. The systems you helped put in place are working. You can let go. She was probably right, but I had learned a hard lesson about what happens when nobody is paying attention. Eternal vigilance might sound paranoid, but it beats the alternative. On the 5th anniversary of the day I first discovered the financial discrepancies, I took out the original spreadsheet I had created, the one that tracked $675,000 in missing funds. I looked at all those rows of data, the carefully documented patterns of theft, the timeline of transfers that told the story of three people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. They had been clever, I had to admit. The scheme was well designed, and might have continued for years if I had not happened to have the exact skill set needed to detect it. How many other HOAs were being victimized by similar schemes, with nobody to notice or nobody willing to take on the fight? I thought about reaching out to state legislators about strengthening HOA financial oversight requirements, maybe mandatory external audits for communities over a certain size, maybe stricter licensing requirements for HOA treasurers, maybe better protections for whistleblowers who reported financial misconduct. But then, I remembered that I was supposed to be retired. I had fought my fight and won my victory. There were other people who could take up the cause of HOA reform. Younger people with more energy and less interest in golf. Still, I kept the spreadsheet, and the banker's boxes full of evidence, and all the trial transcripts and legal documents. Someday, maybe I would write a book about the experience. Or maybe I would just leave it all to Emily, who could decide what to do with it after I was gone. For now, it was enough to know that I had done the right thing, that I had stood up when it mattered. That 300 families were better off, because I had been too stubborn to let corruption stand unchallenged. I looked out at the Meadowbrook Estates community, with its well-maintained streets and beautiful landscaping and happy residents, and I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was what an HOA was supposed to be, neighbors working together to maintain their community, not a personal enrichment scheme for corrupt board members. Helen was right that I needed to let go of my vigilance eventually, but not quite yet, maybe after one more quarterly financial review. Just to be sure, old habits really do die hard, especially for retired bankers who once traced HOA reserve funds to an offshore account and brought down an entire corrupt board in the process. Some stories have clear endings with everyone getting exactly what they deserve. This was one of those stories, and I was proud to have been part of it.